Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Food and Beverage Solutions. I am Beth Rappaport with Campbell Property Management. Campbell's been in business since 1953, managing community associations just like yours. We are locally owned and operated and take great pride in the level of service we provide to our clients, many of whom have been with us for decades. Today, I'm joined by Dave Manuchia, CEO of Restaurant Partners, Inc. Dave has been in the restaurant business since 1982, and his company, Restaurant Partners, Inc., has been in business since 1992. Dave was a member of the founding team at Olive Garden, and today he consults with, owns, and operates properties throughout Florida. Dave had his national TV debut just last week on the History Channel's The Food That Built America, Season 5, Episode 1. Dave has also appeared on a CBS Florida documentary in 2022. He also serves as an expert witness for restaurant legal trials and is a frequent guest lecturer at our colleges and universities here in Florida, and we're honored to have him with us today. I would like to thank our audience for the substantial number of excellent questions they provided upon registration. Many of these topics have been incorporated into today's webinar and presentation. Some of the topics could really be their own webinar entirely. Of the 1 hour that we have together today, we're going to spend about 15-20 minutes towards the end of the presentation for questions and answers. As Ashley mentioned, we will also send out the presentation, the recording, some bonus content, and more after the webinar, including Dave's contact details for your additional follow-up. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dave.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to you and Ashley and Campbell for allowing me a little bit of time this afternoon, and everybody who's listening. Thanks for allowing me to break into your lunch hour a little bit. There were a lot of great questions that we got, and I'm hopeful that we'll cover most of the answers, but obviously we'll not get to all of those, and you'll have our contact information at the end of this, as Beth mentioned. So I think we're going to start with obviously the question of why are we doing food and beverage at all? And I think, most of you that are on this webinar are on it for one of two reasons. Either you want to get into food and beverage, or maybe you want to get out of food and beverage. I'm not really sure, because that's a difficult vendor to find and a difficult vendor to manage if you're not versed in how food and beverage really works. So let's start with why you'd want to get into it. As you're all aware, Florida is now the fastest growing state in the union. There are about 23 million people in the state of Florida, with 400,000 new ones coming every year. 4 million of those people live in HOA communities around the state. And as these people come to our state from the Northeast or the Midwest or wherever, even overseas, a lot of people are a little bit more discerning in the services they want in their communities. As I'm sure you're aware, if you're aware as a board member, that you're hearing those kinds of things in your meetings. Right now, F&B is a strong component on most properties, and it increases the value of your home. F&B is a strong component on properties now because it raises the home values. And of course, most people move to Florida for socialization. So food and beverage is a critical component of socialization. I think one of the things that you're finding around your communities is that other communities that are newer are providing food and beverage amenities that are a little bit grander than maybe what they've had in the past. So if you've had a snack stand or a tiki bar, maybe now you have a full service restaurant or 2 bars or even a large social hall, which allow more opportunities for your communities to engage in food and beverage opportunities. It can also be profitable, which there were some questions that came up that said, can we make a profit with that? Potentially, yes. And we'll talk about that in just one second.
And I think that's something of great interest to everybody that's here today, because for many of our associations that are joining us, that is definitely a hot topic of conversation is, can it be profitable and how can it be profitable? So Dave, what are some signs that it's time to make a change with your food and beverage operations in the community?
There are some red flags that go up, and we hear it from board members and we hear it from HOA managers a lot. And here are a couple of things that you should be aware of if you have a food and beverage offering on your property right now. Obviously, complaints to the board. Most of the people that are in these communities, as you know, are probably not shy about telling you what they really think about your amenities. And food and beverage is something that everybody is an expert on. They may not know how to play pickleball. They may not have a boat dock or a boat, but everybody eats out and everybody wants to tell you what's wrong or what's right with your food and beverage. Another opportunity that you have as a HOA with your restaurant is, how often are the menus changed? How do they keep from being stale, particularly in closed communities? If you have a guard gate and you can't let the public into your community, the people who eat with you 2 and 3 times a week are going to get bored. So you have to figure out ways to make your menus a little bit more exciting without forcing the operator to change his menu every week, because that's a big undertaking. Is your operator flexible around your holidays and your special events, your charity events, your religious holidays? Is he open or she open? Or are they closed because they can't get staff because their staff is all out of town? And the staff, I can tell you as an operator here in the state of Florida and around the country, staff is very, very difficult. It's the #1 issue that restaurant operators face now, both in terms of cost and in terms of availability. And that's really the big challenge that your operator or any operator is facing now. How do you get good staff? How do you train them? And how do you keep them? Sometimes an operator is unwilling to share their financials, and this is a big deal. We've gone into properties where we'll ask the HOA or the board, what did you do in sales last year in food and beverage? And they don't have any idea. And that's shocking. You should, as a board, be on top of at least what your sales are and a little bit of the metrics of your operator. And we'll talk through that in a minute. Is your operator focused on other interests? For instance, is this just a sidelight for them? Is this their main business? Are they really focused on your community and your residents, or are they worried about other things that they're doing, other restaurants they have? So that's something that could be a red flag. Here's one that we experienced coming into new communities. There are black markets out there at the end of a fiscal year or a calendar year, whenever your mandatory HOA food and beverage credits expire. There are black markets in communities where the operator is not good, that people will sell their $10 of remaining food credits for $3 just to get rid of them because they're not going to use them. We've even been in communities where people would just use the credit to get takeout and then walk out the door and throw it in the trash. It's probably time to make a change if your operator is experiencing any of those things. So those are a couple of telltale signs of whether it's ready to make a change or not.
And then Dave, what about when people just fundamentally refuse to eat at the restaurant at all? Does that happen, and how often?
That's a good question, Beth. And the measure that we use is, if you've used 90% of your mandatory spend, or 90% of the houses in your community have used food and beverage at least once that year, you're probably doing an okay job. If it's less than that and people are refusing to eat, you probably need to do some different things with your food and beverage program to attract that crowd, whether it's pricing, whether it's menu, whether it's service, whether it's decor. Could be a lot of different things. You'll also get some people who say, I never used the restaurant, why am I paying for it? I think the answer to that question is basically, there are a lot of amenities that you may not use on your property, but you're going to pay for them anyway by living in the community. The goal of an operator is to not only get every resident to use it and use up all their mandatory spend, but to use more than that because they like the restaurant so often, and you're presenting them with opportunities, social events and whatever, that they can use those spends. That's the goal of a good operator.
Well, that's a great threshold and benchmark. Thank you, Dave. Okay, so what are some of the challenges to making an operator change?
You know, we see this all the time with boards in particular. They're very afraid to make a change. They don't like it. They like to complain about it. They like to grumble. They like to mumble to each other, but they are afraid to make a change for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost is obviously you've got a contract and you've got a legal commitment to an operator, presumably. But most of those contracts have buyout obligations. So if you have 10 months left and this guy is not doing a good job on your property, there's probably a buyout provision in that contract, if you've set it up right, where it may be worth going ahead and buying that person out and getting somebody in there that satisfies your residents. The other thing, which we'll end up this presentation with a little checklist, the inexperience of board members and HOA managers in selecting an operator. How do I know what to ask? How do I know that they're a good operator? Is it my daughter-in-law's friend? Is it the, food truck guy down the hall? Is it the bagel place? How do I know who a good operator is going to be and how will they fit into our community? And then, are there any qualified operators in your market? I mean, again, are you taking the best of the worst, or are you actually seeking out the best option for your community? There are financial constraints. We run into this all the time. How much is your community willing to pay for a good operator, or an operator at all, or even a restaurant at all? It's pretty common that every resident wants everything and not pay for it. That's goes without saying. The question is, what pain point have you hit with your food and beverage so that your community goes, okay, I'm willing to pay for something a little bit better? And those are questions you'll have to answer as a board and as an HOA manager. The other question that you run into, particularly in larger communities, is what does success look like for an operator? We like to say that there's a bell curve within every community. There are people who want an all-you-can-eat $3.99 buffet. They don't care about quality, just give me a lot of food, cheap. And there are people at the other end of your community who want steak and lobster, and they don't care what it costs. You're probably not going to satisfy either one of those groups. What you're looking to do is satisfy the bell curve of your residents. Give them a good food product, give them a good service product at a price that makes sense for them. And that's really what you're trying to do as a board and as an HOA manager. Satisfy the biggest portion of your bell curve of your community as you can, and deal with the bullets that come from the cheap folks and the folks that want, Capital Grill or something like that, because that's clearly not going to satisfy everybody in your community. And then, of course, the big fear of a board is, what if we screw up? Man, we're going to look bad. And my answer to that question is, if you're looking, you probably screwed up already. So what you have to probably do is make sure that you're spending enough time vetting the next operator and learning from whatever it was that the prior operator did not do to ensure that the new operator can and is willing to do the things that your community wants.
And Dave, let's say the board decides to assemble a committee to work on this task. What characteristics or what, professions do you find would be making helpful contributions to the committee that would be researching new operators?
So generally the people on a committee are the people that are vested. They're the ones that are very opinionated. They're the ones that are willing to spend time to mold that amenity into what they particularly want and their friends particularly want. What you have to be careful of is that they don't represent either the $3.99 buffet or the steak and lobster folks and are presenting to you as if they represent the entire community. So the characteristics is somebody who uses the amenity, or somebody even who has rejected the amenity, but represents the resident base and doesn't represent a fringe or doesn't have a beef, if you can say that, pardon the pun, with your HOA board or a member of your board, or doesn't have a vested interest in seeing the amenities fail. We found this on some properties where there is just a group of folks who are just ready to take down anything. And you probably want to steer clear of those people when you put them on an F&B committee, because like I say, everybody's an expert in food. You're going to get a lot of opinions. Just make sure they all represent the bell curve of your community.
Very helpful. Thank you. And a lot of our community cafes and restaurants are run by a sole proprietor, often referred very fondly to as the guy. Can you tell us a little bit about the guy?
So the guy, we characterize the guy as the individual chef, the caterer who wants to get into full service, the food truck operator who wants a solid kitchen to work out of, the local restaurant guy who has one, maybe two little places and thinks he can expand. This is clearly the less costly option. And I would say if your mandatory HOA spend plus your HOA contribution to the operator is less than $500,000 a year, this is the best option for you. So if you have a snack stand or you have a tiki bar and it does $10,000 a week, $5,000 a week, the guy is going to be your most effective and cost-effective way to go. Some of the characteristics you have to be careful of when you put the guy into your property is, are they collecting your fee and doing the least amount possible for that fee? Or are they working to do the most possible to improve the amenity on your property? Do they have a professional presence on site? For instance, do you know who's in charge today if you walk down to your restaurant? Is there somebody there who can make decisions? Or is it a high school girl on her phone, twiddling her hair saying, I don't know, this is what they told me. So those are the kinds of things that, you have to be careful of when you put the guy in place, because they can't afford necessarily a professional manager. Most of the times the guy doesn't want to talk to the board. He doesn't want to hear your complaints. He doesn't want to do anything necessarily to cost him more money to improve the property. It's just, hey, I'm catching a fee. I'm just going to do it. So the board, and this dovetails with what I said prior to this, the board doesn't always know what the sales are. They don't know what the food cost is. They don't know what menu changes are coming up. They don't know really anything other than, I don't know, maybe it's open today, maybe it's not open today. Let's go down and find out. Now, there are times where budgets of the community will dictate using hourly staff as manager. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as the hourly staff member, you know who's in charge. They have the authority to make decisions, to unlock the door, to receive the orders, to ring up the sales, all those kinds of things. Another characteristic of the guy, and we've seen this a couple of times, is half your staff his relatives or her relatives? Is it his mother on the cash stand? Is it his daughter at the host stand? Is it his brother in the kitchen cooking? That's probably not going to work out for you as a board and as an HOA manager, because if one goes, they all go. And so that's a challenge of hiring the guy. And then finally, of course, is using your facility for outside revenues. So are they taking that food out of your kitchen and putting it in the food truck? Are they using your leftovers to put a catering job down the street at the holidays? How do you know that the guy is focused on your community? And that's really the key as a board member to making sure that you have the right operator in your facility.
You know, Dave, that's a pretty sensitive topic, because in a lot of our associations, or a lot of the associations, the space is basically given to the operator to use. The operator's not paying rent. They are using the association's electricity and water and all those things. So that's really an excellent point to bring up. And then I have another question about the guy. What if the guy is famous? You know, we have seen examples where it's a celebrity chef. Does that improve the chances of success?
Here's what I'm going to tell you. The more famous they are, the less time they're going to spend on your property because they want to be on TV. And I know I was on TV. I got that. But they're going to want to write a cookbook. They're going to want to show up, touch base, and get out. You're probably not going to get the benefit of that fame. A lot of these guys, you see the Gordon Ramsays and the Emeralds of the world, they're licensing their names to get a royalty. They show up for the opening, they show up for the closing, and maybe once in a while they'll show up for a charity event, but they're generally not going to work it beyond the first week or so of that. So, and again, you know, I don't want to make characteristic broad brush strokes, but the more famous somebody is, probably the tougher they are to deal with because they have lots of options. So be careful of that. I'm not saying don't hire somebody, and there are some great people out there, great operators and great chefs. Just go in with your eyes open.
Fair enough. And now switching gears, tell us about the professional. What characteristics should boards be looking for there?
So this would be somebody that where you have a mandatory HOA, a resident spend, and an HOA contribution of $1 million a year or more, this is probably the direction you're going to want to look because you probably have a bigger restaurant. You probably have a more demanding customer base. They have a higher mandate that they have to use every year. So they're going to want to spend their money, and they're going to want something a little higher level for that. It's not just frozen chicken fingers in a basket at the tiki bar. It's a little bit higher level to satisfy their needs. And this usually happens in new communities where you're building a 30 or 40 or 70,000 square foot clubhouse and it has a 200 seat restaurant. That's not something you want to give to the food truck guy right out of the box, probably, because they may not be able to handle that kind of a la carte service. So some of the characteristics, of course, are that there is a manager on site or a management team on site, and you know who they are, and they're in charge, and they're listening to the residents, and they're listening to the HOA board. What do we need to do to mold our offering to your community needs? The staff is being trained. They're not just hired at 4 o'clock and on your floor serving somebody at 5 o'clock. There's a training program that they know the food, they know the steps of service, they know the sanitation procedures, the safety procedures. Generally, the professional has a program like that. Then the professional is always willing to be part of the community. And by that, I mean, they participate in the charity events. They participate in call it the cancer walks, the holiday festivities. They'll show up at a board meeting and answer questions if you ask them to. They'll give you a heads up on what they're thinking on menu changes so that your board and your HOA has a chance to at least have some input to make sure that they're offering you what you need, not what they want to give you, but what you need. And they communicate regularly. The social director on some of your properties is a key component. Are they 3 months out or are they 3 days out in promoting your events? And what role does food and beverage have in those events? I can tell you the better communities hand in glove work with F&B and the social directors to make sure that they're pre-planning their events and every detail is taken care of, whether it's a Mother's Day buffet or a St. Patrick's Day event or Christmas or Hanukkah. They're working well ahead of time to make sure everything's covered and running it by the board to make sure that the hours are right and the budgets are correct. Professionals have their recipes costed out. They want to make money. You know, they're not just throwing stuff on a plate. They're making sure that the portions are what they're supposed to be, that the recipes are costed out, they're using the right ingredients. They're bringing sales building ideas. And I'll give you an example. We have a property that has a monthly First Friday where residents sign up and we do a themed event where 120, 125 people show up. So every month is a different thing, whether it's, the pumpkin patch at Halloween, or whether it's the holiday Christmas cheer, or whether it's St. Patrick's Day, or whatever. So is your operator bringing sales building ideas for food and beverage and social events to the table for consideration? You're not going to accept all of them, but are they continuing to bring ideas to the table? This professional does and needs to have proper insurance? So workers' comp, liquor liability, which is critical for you guys, EPLI, which is employment practices liability insurance, in case somebody does something untoward with either a resident or another member of your staff. And do they have good sanitation procedures? Are they protecting your asset? Are they getting the grease traps clean and the hoods clean and the pest control right? Do they have safety committee meetings quarterly? That's one of the things that insurance companies look for to keep your liability insurance down. So do they have the notes from your safety committee meetings every quarter? Those are things that you can ask a professional about, either as they're in your property or as you're considering them for your property.
Yes, these are definitely things that are probably not top of mind with board members until something happens. And now all of a sudden, then, the discussion comes up about these things and how they're handled. So those are some really great points for our board members to take into consideration. And when screening some operators, what are some main topics, Dave, that you suggest board members and committees focus on?
So this is a question that came up a lot in the questions that participants asked before this webinar. And what we did is put together just a quick list. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's some of the things that you can ask a potential operator as you're screening them for your property. Number one, are all your employees on payroll? We see after every hurricane in Florida, all these roofers descend on the places where the hurricanes have hit. And most of those roofers are 1099, floating in, floating out. We don't know where they came from. They pull up in their truck and they leave in their truck and they're gone. You don't want that for restaurant employees. You want employees that are on the payroll of the operator, because then they have control over those people. The exception might be there are a pool of banquet servers that sometimes operators will draw upon, so that they're not full-time employees, but they draft them for certain events or certain big holidays. That's probably acceptable. But if your regular cook is on 1099, or your regular server or your regular host, the chances of them being around very long are not very good. Because if they're on payroll, you're paying payroll taxes. You may have benefits for these people, insurance and 401k, and they're more likely to stick around longer. Do you have the owner's cell phone? Do you know who the owner is? How do you get a hold of somebody? Or again, are you talking to the high school girl who happens to show up today, hoping that that message gets to the owner and a change is made that's needed? I mentioned recipes costed out. I emphasize that because as a resident, if you're going into a property or into your restaurant, and today you get a 6-ounce steak and tomorrow you get a 9-ounce steak, and then you come back and you get a 6-ounce steak, how do you know what's the right portion? And do you feel ripped off when you get the 6-ounce instead of the 9-ounce? Or did they screw up when they put the 9-ounce in there? So those are things that are really important when talking to an operator. Do they have enough staff to support turnover? Huge issue in the restaurant business, as you all know. A lot of these folks are in school, they come and go, they're seasonal. Can the operator pull from other places for professional staff and management? So, if a manager quits, who's taking over? Do they have backup? Do they communicate regularly with the board? I think this is a key component. If I were sitting on an HOA board, I would require my operator to talk to me at least once a quarter and present me some financials at least once a quarter. Many do it once a month. We do it once a month, but that may be too burdensome. But you probably need to know what's on that operator's mind. Again, do they bring sales building ideas to the table? We talked about that. Do they share the financial performance? And do they solicit resident feedback? So are they out there with survey monkeys to your residents asking, what would you like to see better? Did you like that specials list? Are they talking to residents in focus groups? One of the things that we like to do is gather 8 or 10 residents together, buy them lunch, and sit down and let them fire away. What are we doing? Not wait until, we get a lot of complaints. Let's be proactive about, soliciting the resident feedback. And you as board members do this all the time. Does your restaurant operator do that as well? Are they willing to expand their services to meet the community needs? So do they do takeout? Do they do delivery? Do they service your pool? Do they send a server around your pool to get drinks? Do they do provisioning? One of the things that COVID brought to light is that people weren't always allowed out of their communities to go to Publix or go to the grocery store to get their paper towels or chicken or toilet paper. We were able to offer those things through our vendors and our distributors so that people could buy 10 pounds of chicken or 6 steaks if they wanted to, pick them up at the restaurant in their community and never have to leave the community. And we've continued that program along in some of our properties. So if you happen to like the filet that we serve and you want 6 of them, order it and pick them up on Friday. So, and do they do in-home catering? A lot of times you'll want to have a party at your house, or your residents will. Maybe they'll just want to use your staff. Maybe they'll want you to cater it. Do they have the ability and the willingness to do that? Do they operate other HOAs? Do they have the experience in dealing with the bell curve of residents, the board members, the HOA management company, and the rules and requirements that are needed in HOAs? Do they have full service liquor license? And I'll tell you why this is important. And there were a lot of questions from our attendees about liquor license, and I'm not going to go into specifics about liquor license too much. But if you have a full service liquor license as a vendor, you have been vetted and fingerprinted in the state of Florida. And that means you do not have a felony in the last 15 years and your fingerprints are on file. Why is that important? It's not critical in and of itself, but it's an important component as you're vetting these operators to make sure that you're not putting, the embezzler or the jail cook or whatever on your property, because you have a liability as a board. The other part of this, and it goes along with presenting the best value to your community, is do they have a primary food supplier? Do they use a Sysco, a Cheney Brothers, a Gordon Foods, and do they have an MDA, which is a master distribution agreement, which keeps their markup down so that they can pass that savings along to your residents? If they're buying from Costco and Sam's and Publix every day and Restaurant Depot, they're paying too much, and that cost has to be passed along to your residents, and you're not getting the value that you need from that operator. So that's a question to ask. And what is their targeted food cost? We generally say in a normal situation, 33 to 36% food cost. And a lot of that depends on what your residents are willing to pay and what the top end prices are. If your operator does not know his food cost, or makes up a number, or it's way out of line between these numbers, probably doesn't have a handle on what his financial status is. He's probably winging it. So it's a fair question to ask somebody who you're screening to be your restaurant operator. 3 other quick things. The longest management contract they've ever had. Are they in these communities for a year and get bought out? Have they never had a contract? Or have they had communities that have kept them for 5, 7, 10, 15 years even? An interesting one, and one that board members really need to pay attention to, is their workers' comp mod. In the state of Florida, the workers' comp mod starts at 1.0. And above that means that you've had more claims on your workers' comp. And below that means that you're doing a better job controlling the safety in your facility. So if you have a 1.3 or a 1.4 or a 1.5 workers' comp mod, you're probably not doing a good job in making sure that the floors are mopped and the dish machine is in good working order and the equipment blades are sharpened and all those things, because you're getting a lot of injuries with your staff. Again, as an example, we have like a 0.72 is our mod. So we have programs in place to keep that mod down, but it's a great question to ask an operator. And again, the guy may or may not know what his mod is. And finally, do they e-verify all employees? And, with all the issues on illegal aliens and border crossings and all those things that are in the news these days, there is a government program with 1 million businesses attached that allows you to quickly and accurately e-verify all employees that are working on your property. And you say, well, why is that a big deal if they're the operator's employees? Again, as a board, probably, particularly if it's the guy, if somebody's going to sue you, they're not going to sue the guy. He doesn't have anything. They're going to sue your community. And that's where your risk is as a board on putting the wrong person into your community. So those are a couple of things on a checklist that at least you can ask as you're starting to screen people along the way.
So just going back to the background checks, that's super important. And again, one of those things that you might not find out some information until a problem has happened. Having your vendors background check employees before they come onto your property is really important.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. So Dave, what can boards expect to pay? What should all of this cost if done the best way possible for each community?
So like a good CEO, I'm going to use the answer, it depends. And the criteria that you need to look at is, what is the size of your community and what does that dictate in terms of service levels? Do you have 300 homes or do you have 1,200 homes? Makes a difference. What level of service are you looking for? Are you looking for just breakfast and lunch? Are you looking for lunch and dinner? Are you looking for full alcohol, just beer and wine? That's a question that will dictate how much you pay. The big one is hours of operation. I can tell you, as I mentioned before, that labor is the huge thing for restaurant operators now. There are communities where we're paying line cooks $25 an hour. And it's very difficult if you have to be open 12 or 14 hours a day to justify that labor expense unless the community is willing to pay or the residents are willing to pay. So that's a big question to answer when you ask how much does it cost. Menu pricing restrictions, what is your community willing to pay in terms of pricing? Are they willing to pay what they would pay out on the street, or do they want a discount? Let me give you a real quick thing on that. We had a community where we were serving typical wine glasses, 9-ounce wine glasses, 12-ounce balloon glasses for wines, and people were complaining that we didn't fill them to the top. So rather than fight that, we went out and bought 6-ounce wine glasses and we filled them to the top and everybody was happy. What is your community attitude toward what they're willing to pay? And then seasonality. Be honest with your operator about seasonality. Are you losing 20% of your community in the summer, or are you losing 80% of your community in the summer? Because that makes it really difficult on the operator to keep their full-time management, their staff, particularly if the servers aren't making any money, if 2/3 of your community has gone up north for the summer or gone to summer camp. So that's the criteria. And here's how it's determined. Usually it's a monthly fee, and that helps both the HOA and the operator. Even though you may be collecting HOA fees quarterly, sit on your money, pay the operator going forward monthly. And that will help that operator. It also mitigates your risk as a board so that the operator isn't getting paid a year up front, and by the end of 7 months, they're out of money. We've seen that happen as well. So regulate it every month and pay them every month. There are two different models. There's a model that is used in some communities where the HOA pays all the costs. You want steak and lobster? No problem. And then you pay the operator a fee. And there are others that are modified where you pay the operator based on a projected labor cost, food cost, insurance cost, and then it's up to the operator whether they can operate within those guidelines. That's really difficult when an operator is coming into a community that doesn't have any sales history, or a new community that you're building where you don't really know what the sales are going to be. So those are two different models you can use, and there are variations of each of those models. And here's where you have a chance to make some money. There are communities that build into their contract, we'll pay you, but if you make a profit, we want a little piece of that profit. And usually those are the communities that have large social calendars where the operator can really, capitalize on parties and holidays and events, so that profit can come in bigger chunks. Very difficult to do that if you just have an a la carte restaurant, because you're not getting those big chunks, those $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 parties, those bar mitzvahs or weddings or, celebrations of life, whatever they happen to be. So that's a negotiable item based on your characteristics of your property. Likely when you bring a new operator in, there are transition costs and a transition time. They could be 30 days up to 90 days. Typically the HOA would pay that. So that's for new menus, new uniforms, clean up the place. You may have to buy a new point of sale system. You may have to get stuff fixed. You may have to restock knives and forks and plateware and glassware, depending on what the prior operator has and what they took with them. And then you should always build in somewhere between a 60 and 180 day out clause in each contract, as we talked about at the top of the program, so that if the operator is not doing their job, you have a way to get out of that. Conversely, and be careful of this, if your community is particularly difficult to work with, that 60 to 80, 180 day clause can work against you, because the operator can go, I've had enough. I can't deal with these residents. I can't deal with this board, whatever reason. And you may lose them. So it's a double-edged sword there that you have to be careful of. And we've seen some communities, quite frankly, that have burned through operators because they were extremely difficult. And you don't want to get that reputation.
That's for sure. And we see that on the property management side of the business as well.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, it's at the 45-minute mark. I think we're ready to start our questions and answers.
Great.
So Dave, our first question, does a member of the board of directors need to be on the liquor license?
So let me address liquor licenses in generality rather than specifics. There are 41 different liquor licenses in the state of Florida. So again, my answer is going to be, it depends. Most likely, you will need an operator or an owner on that liquor license, but it does depend on the type you pick and what your community is. Is it a resort license? Is it a beer and wine only license? Is it a full alcohol license? Is it a tennis club license? There are 41 different licenses, and I'd recommend that you check with your community attorney based on what your particular needs are, and they can look up the statute. And I believe we have a link to the DBPR that we may be giving you, Beth, if you have that we can share with them.
We will be sharing that in the follow-up materials as a bonus item. Yes.
Right. So that would be the first step. So I don't want to put generalities out there and have somebody say, well, Dave said we didn't need to be on it. That's not true.
All righty. And who can be held responsible when there is an injury at the tiki bar or the restaurant that involves alcohol?
So again, using the analogy of the guy versus the professional, generally when you hire a professional, The professional will be required to have liability insurance, liquor liability, and general liability. The board still has to have their property insurance and property liability for the clubhouse, but you can require the operator to bring their own liability insurance. And it just depends on who you're hiring again. If it's the tiki bar or the food truck guy to run your pool tiki bar, it's probably not going to have that. If it's the professional, you can probably require them to have that insurance.
Okay, very good. And we have a question from an upscale community that's in the process of upgrading the clubhouse. They would like to add a food and beverage element, but the reaction is that it might cost a bit of money to put in a kitchen and so forth at a time when residents are already paying a lot of money for other assessments, insurance increases, reserve requirements, and so forth. So what can they do? What could a community like that do, where they could open perhaps a smaller operation, and how would they go about doing that?
That's a great question. It will cost money. You can expect to spend anywhere just on kitchen equipment, anywhere between $300,000 and $800,000 for a full-scale kitchen. If you're going to put in an upscale restaurant. If you're going to put in a tiki bar with a bar, it could be as little as $50,000 or $75,000. Again, it depends on what your community is demanding and what they're willing to pay for. One of the things a professional group should be able to bring are all the vendors necessary to open a new restaurant or guide you. And that would include kitchen design people, architects, vendors for uniforms, small wares vendors, people who do the hood cleaning and the grease trap cleaning and, all those things, people who put the dishwashers in. A professional group would be able to bring you those vendors either on a consulting basis or on an operating basis so that you don't have to scout around or Google who's the best person for kitchen equipment. Generally, also, if it's a larger professional group, they'll bring you contract discount pricing that they enjoy and share with their clients so that you're paying for their services through the discounts you get that they've already built into their program. So it could end up costing you nothing or even less than if you tried to do it yourself.
Good to know. Thank you. And we have a question from our social director community, which, by the way, I love how you spoke about collaborating with the social directors and the lifestyle event directors and just kind of, adding some value and generating some ideas. So the question is, what's the difference between hiring or contracting off-site vendors to cook on-site versus prepping the food on site for specific social director events? So let's say you're having something that you might only have a few times a year, a large scale event. Can you speak a little bit to how you would, bring in the food and beverage? What would be the best way to go about this?
So a large caterer and a professional caterer, if you're only going to do 6, 8, 10 events a year even, and you don't have a kitchen of your own and you don't have a facility of your own, that's the right way to go. Go get a local caterer, and there are a lot of good caterers around the state for sure that will do your event. Obviously, it'll cost you more than if you did it in-house, but they'll bring the liability, they'll bring the staff, they'll clean up, they'll bring the food. So that's the way to go if you're only going to do a handful of events a year on your property. If you have a restaurant operator, my recommendation would be ask that operator first, give them the right of first refusal to see if they're capable of doing that, because they want the sales. And if you trust them, you'd like to use them as much as possible to do that catering. But if you don't have an operator and you're just going to do a Mother's Day brunch, and go get a caterer, or a Christmas dinner, or whatever it happens to be. Go get a caterer, and your social director should be able to line you up with that.
Very helpful. Going back to the targeted food cost of 33 to 36%, is that just food, or is that food and beverage, or is it a blended number?
No, that would just be food. Beverage, beverage should bring your costs down if you do it right. Again, I'm going to say that hesitatingly because if your community is a community that wants 9-ounce wine pours for $3, it's not going to bring your cost of sales down at all. But in a normal environment, beverage should bring your total cost of sales down. And again, I'll use the "it depends" answer because it depends on what your community is willing to pay versus what they have to pay out on the street and how your vendor purchases. Are they purchasing at a retail and then trying to mark it up? Or do they have a distribution agreement and contract pricing so that they can get the product cheaper and offer it to your residents cheaper?
Okay. And, most of our condos and HOAs are not-for-profit associations. Is it okay for the restaurant to make a profit under these circumstances?
Not only is it okay, you would hope that they would. That's the goal. Nobody wants to go into an event and lose money, or into a property and lose money. So if you're going to take a piece of their profit and put it back into your nonprofit, you can do it in putting it toward the capital expense of the restaurant or the banquet room, or putting it into marketing social events the next year, so that you're really not making a profit. You're just really displacing costs that you might otherwise have had and putting it back into your operation so you can keep your budget in line the following year, or the second half of the year, if you will, depending on when you do that. So profit is a little bit of a misnomer. It's just a reallocation of some of the funds to make your food and beverage offerings even more appealing to your residents.
Okay. And is there a rule of thumb for the size of the kitchen as it relates to the number of seats? Or is there, a particular ratio that associations could be looking at?
So
And I,
oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
and, during COVID, a lot of associations added outdoor seating, obviously, because everybody enjoyed dining al fresco. But then it might have caused a backup in the kitchen because now we have many more seats than we had planned. And then it caused some issues because diners saw empty tables, but were told they couldn't be seated. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great point. Generally, when you're building out a full service restaurant, and this may not necessarily apply to clubhouses and HOAs, but if you were just building, I'll go back to Olive Garden for a second. It's a 2/3 front of the house to 1/3 back of the house ratio. That's generally what you're trying to do. In an HOA community, and you raise a great point, Beth, sometimes there are more seats outside than there are inside the restaurant. So what you have to do is take a look at the equipment versus the number of seats that you're having to serve at full capacity. So if you have a 200-seat restaurant, it's probably a good idea to have a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot kitchen. And a lot of that will be storage. And that's the misnomer. Without getting too deep into the logistics of deliveries, your walk-in coolers, your freezers, and your dry storage need to be big enough to service that number of seats, your liquor storage. Now, if you have storage someplace else in the clubhouse that's easily accessible to the restaurant, your kitchen doesn't have to be that big. But in general, you probably, for a 200-seat restaurant, need about a 2,000 square foot kitchen, give or take. And again, I'm using generalities here. So if you're building a new community, and I'm sure there are a couple of home builders on this call, they'll understand that ratio as you start building new communities. Sometimes you have to build the church for Easter Sunday because your community is going to grow and is going to sell out over the next couple of years, and you don't want to go back after 2 years, tear it all up, and rebuild the kitchen.
Okay. And in an upscale community, non-country club, or what we like to call in South Florida, country club living without the membership, is there a typical subsidy per door that is paid to the operator?
The answer is no, not typical. Generally, a professional operator needs to, depending on the size, and again, depending on the number of homes and the hours of operation, all those things we talked about before, an operator is probably going to command a fee of somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a month between the mandatory resident HOA spend and the HOA subsidy. That's their fee. But the sales are probably going to need to be over $1 million between mandatory resident spend and HOA contribution to hire that professional. If you're just doing a tiki bar, and I keep using that as an example at the pool, there shouldn't be any mandatory spend or very little for the operator. What you have to be careful of is that that operator can make a profit, though, and satisfy the resident service demands. Otherwise, you're just going to get the high school girl on her phone at the bar, and she's going to work the business down to a manageable level. They're not going to actively grow your business and satisfy your residents. So those are things that are really important, knowing what your community expectations are.
Okay, and switching gears to insurance, do you have to have your food and beverage venue for the community on your master insurance policy, or would that be on a separate policy?
Well, because most of these restaurants are within a clubhouse environment, yes. Because if somebody walks out the front door of the restaurant and slips in the lobby of your clubhouse, was it a restaurant issue? Was it a wet floor in the lobby? Did they drink too much? So the answer is yes, you'll need to notify your insurance company that you have a restaurant. But again, you can mandate that your restaurant operator in a large scale environment has property and or mostly liability insurance, liquor liability and general liability as well. So there are two levels of that. And in some cases, professional operators have umbrella policies as well that would cover them. So you can have multiple layers of insurance and require your restaurant operator to have some of those, but it's not going to let you off the hook, because any good attorney, and I hope there aren't very many on this call, but there probably are, any good attorney is going to pierce that veil and go after the highest dollar potential defendant that they can find. So yes, I would recommend that the HOA continue to have that insurance on that restaurant.
Awesome. Well, Dave, we are at 1 o'clock, and this has been a fantastic hour with a lot of valuable information. There were a couple of questions we did not get to. I have notated them, and we're going to answer them privately. And as well, Dave's information is shared here. His email and his phone number are available, and he is always happy to take your call and speak with you. And we will be sending out this information after the webinar. So on behalf of Campbell Property Management, Dave and our audience, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.